know maybe a casual recruiting observer who just shows up the week of signing day in December and February, and they say, oh, there's the top 10. All right, got it. Moving on. I'll be back in the fall when toe meets leather. They may not pick up on the nuance of this. Like North Carolina has a really good recruiting class. 90% of the kids in their class are from in-state. I'm looking at Oregon's recruiting class right now. There's one kid in this entire class that's from the state of Oregon. If you're going to recruit at a top 10 level in Oregon, obviously you have to have a massive out-of-state recruiting infrastructure in place. But man, it's one thing to say it, Huff, Wolfong. Like it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to actually get your staff in there and go from Florida to they went to Nebraska this year, California, Utah, all over the place. And they're beating people. They're beating programs who are mainstays in those geographical recruiting beds. I know no one doubted whether Mario Cristobal could recruit when he got there, but there's a difference. Like we talk about this a lot behind the scenes. There's a difference in your profile as a regional recruiter when you're an assistant coach versus the entire vision you have to cast when you're the head man and you're casting the vision, you're running the program. It's kind of a redundant question, but man, has this not been pretty impressive from them so far?
I think when you look at what they've done over the last 3 or 4 years, you can't help but notice that Oregon is recruiting like they're a national program, like an Alabama, like an LSU, like a Clemson. They're going and picking and choosing who they want in states outside their own region, and then they're going into their backyard. They're going into the states that aren't Oregon, but that are in that Pac-12 footprint and cherry picking players. If you look at what they've done over the last few years, they have made a big time pain in the side of the state of Arizona, getting 3 of the top 5 players this year. When you're going into the Arizonas and to the Utahs of the world, not only are you strengthening your roster, you're crippling your fellow Pac-12 schools rosters by taking their best players. And that's what I think Oregon has done that's been so remarkable, is it's not just what they've done from a national standpoint. I'll let Steve talk about what they've done nationally, but regionally on the West Coast, how they've really crippled so many of their Pac-12 counterparts. That's been what's really separated them, in my opinion. I mean, Oregon is a national brand. Don't get me wrong, but Oregon is also a destination that when West Coast kids want to go take an unofficial visit when they're a freshman, when they're a sophomore, Oregon is one of those places they want to stop. So they can offset the pandemic when there's no official visits, no unofficial visits for a year. Most of those kids visited Oregon when they were freshmen or sophomore to begin with. In fact, in a pure stroke of luck, I don't think they knew that there was going to be a worldwide pandemic happening 5 days later, but they had a junior day literally the last weekend before the pandemic shut down recruiting. In fact, Ty Thompson, who was their quarterback that they signed this class, was on campus when the NCAA released a statement saying that the dead period was going to be extended for an indefinite period. So Oregon just without even trying, was able to get ahead of the pandemic shutting down recruiting. And that's the kind of just what you expect from them. They always got a plan in place. They've always got something that they can do to really show their university off to recruits. They had that junior day, had a number of kids come in from California, from Oregon, from Washington. No surprise that they end up at the top class in the Pac-12.
Look, I've been a fly on the wall for an big Oregon visit weekend, because I was out there for their Saturday Night Live camp in Eugene 2 years ago. And they ended up landing a bunch of those kids, Kingsley, Jackson Light, Jonah Miller. Those guys are part of the offensive line group. Keith Brown at linebacker. Troy Franklin was out there. So that camp really paid off for them. And just as soon as you get off the elevator, if you're a prospect and you're visiting Eugene, as soon as you get off the elevator, the whole coaching staff, off-field staff, everybody's there waiting for you, and that elevator door opens and they just erupt. I mean, they are cheering their asses off for you. You haven't even gotten in the building. Like, you're still on the elevator. And so what an amazing way to start off the visit. And I've seen coaches talk about that before, and kids. But then the next thing you do, you go from there, from the lobby, you're in the kitchen, man. You're in the cafeteria, and Mario Cristobal is leading the discussion about the nutrition and meal program you're on. And if you're an athlete, that's like the thing you want to hear, one of the first things you want to hear. So you go from the lobby to the kitchen, man. So now you're in there learning about their strength and conditioning program, and how they're going to fuel you and how they're going to take you to the next level. But beyond the bells and whistles, and Oregon's got terrific facilities and terrific backing for their athletes. the way that they've recruited is impressed me, and I think that they're knocking on the door of getting into the college football playoff. They've recruited the offensive line as well as anybody nationally. I know Alabama just signed an epic class, so but beyond that, Oregon's recruiting the offensive line at the same pace as Notre Dame and some of those other schools that have amazing fronts. Oregon hit, quarterback. That's the one where, like, is Ty Thompson, you got to have a program changer at that position to make the playoff more times than not. And if you don't, you got a guy like Ian Book who's got a ton of talent around him. I like that Oregon has landed some guys in the front seven that can be difference makers and pass rushers. Obviously, you have Kayvon Thibodeau. Ohio State's pointing towards all the guys that they've developed on the defensive front. Mario Cristobal and company are saying, well, you, Kayvon, and then you for JT, you guys can kind of start that for us out west. But even getting a guy like Jabril McNeil and guys like that, those guys can be difference makers. Sewell and Flo, those are elite guys in your front seven. And then they've added a lot of speed at the skill offensively and defensively. So if the Anthony Brown is the answer there at quarterback or Ty Thompson, ultimately, I think they put the pieces around the quarterback position to be very competitive. JT would be an extremely pivotal recruit for them next year as they try and get over the hump. But Brandon, do you think that they've recruited championship level in the trenches? And more than anything, your thoughts on Ty Thompson and then their coordinator situation with a new DC, they lose Andy Avalos, and your thoughts on Joe Moorhead. Is he a championship level OC?
Yeah, I mean, I think we look at the last time that Moorhead was calling an offense as a coordinator, it was at Penn State, and they were lighting up the Rose Bowl scorebook. Now, their defense couldn't stop USC that day, but their offense did everything that they could. So we know he's a champion play caller. We also know that Tim DeRuyter has had a great run as a defensive coordinator when he was at Texas A&M. And even the early parts of his time at Cal as the DC before Peter Sirmon took over, you look at how he showcased a guy like Evan Weaver. Now take a guy with the talent of a Kayvon Thibodeau and what he could do as a featured pass rusher like Cal used Evan Weaver. You're looking more like Von Miller territory, who DeRuyter was the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M for. So you've got two coordinators that have a history at big-time programs in big stages of being great at their play calling duties. But I think where Oregon, like you said, Steve, you asked, have they recruited at championship level in the trenches? Absolutely. Because I think that's what's really separated Oregon the last few years is how much of a priority and an emphasis has been placed on offensive linemen, on defensive linemen, on pass rushers, on skilled athletic tackles. You look at Alex Mirabel. I mean, he is he's probably the smallest offensive line coach in college football. I mean, when I see him at a camp, it's always just, you have to do a double take. But that guy's units are among the best in the country each and every year. And you look at what Pate Sewell did at Oregon in the 2 years that he started there. He went from being a guy that we liked, he was a top 50 player, number one player in Utah, to now a likely top 3 or 4 pick. And that was all development because Mario Cristobal is an offensive line guy. He was an offensive lineman in college. He's an offensive line coach. Between him and Mirabel, there is such an importance and an emphasis placed on getting great offensive linemen that can do a number of things. You look at their class this year and you look at their offensive line. You get Kingsley Suamataia, who's the number one tackle out west, a 5-star player. And then you get Jackson Light, who, when you watch Jackson Light on film, it's one of the more entertaining things that you're going to watch. The guy's running stride for stride with his running back, but knocking people out. While his running back is looking for his blocks, Jackson Light's a foot in front of him, knocking guys out, getting right back in front of him. So they know it's not just about tackles. It's about getting good interior linemen too. Then you flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. Joe Salavea's got a tremendous reputation through his time when he was at Washington State, when he was at Arizona before that, and now at Oregon, of not just being able to really recruit high-level players, but then those guys turn out and play at a high level when they get to Oregon. So I think that commitment to the trenches is probably the biggest thing that Oregon has been able to do. If you go back to their national championship loss to Ohio State in 2015, after the 2014 season, where did that game really turn? Well, it turned when Ezekiel Elliott was unstoppable and untouchable by Oregon because Oregon's offensive or defensive line was getting pushed back every single play. Keep in mind, they had Eric Armstead and DeForest Buckner, 2 future Pro Bowlers, 2 future first rounders on that defensive line, but Ohio State was that much bigger and stronger. Oregon didn't have the depth. Now they've made that a priority, not just to get talent on the offensive and defensive lines, but to get depth at both those positions so you can rotate, you can keep your guys fresh. They had a very young offensive line this year with Pate Sewell opting out and losing four of their previous starters to graduation, I thought Oregon's offensive line gelled just fine this year. So what are they going to be like with the spring football, with a normal season, with a normal year with no opt-outs? I mean, people forget a number of key players opted out for Oregon this year, and losing Penei Sewell was a big blow. So that's a program that I think, because they have the depth, that's why they were able to offset the losses to opt-outs and still be the Pac-12 champions.
Yeah, and to circle back here, just to go back to that whole word branding, I think a lot of people think sometimes it's overused, and maybe sometimes it is overused. But in this particular context, if anything, it's underused. I just want someone who doesn't even know anything about college football to say this out loud. There is an entity on the West Coast that has convinced, if you got one opportunity and you can take one visit, I've got 17 and 18-year-old kids opting to visit coastal Oregon or interior Oregon instead of coastal Southern California. That is the power of branding. Like that's what that over time, that's what that thing has become.